Just Branding. Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Just Branding. And we have a very rebellious whiff in the air because we have Steve Noss with us, who is Steve. Steve is the head of creative at an amazing brand that I've had dealings with on and off over the years, a brand called Parry. They are an accountants, but folks, they are not your typical boring, stuffy accountants, as we will go through in this episode. They are known famously as the rebels of accountancy. And what this episode is going to be all about is how they basically carved out a niche in their marketplace, stood out for some really interesting reasons, and really have kind of gone from strength to strength. But we'll get into that as we go through. Steve is with us here. Steve, welcome to the show. Thank you for agreeing to do this with us.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Jacob. I'm delighted to be on the Just Branding podcast. Really looking forward to it. Quite an intro. Appreciate that. Set the bar very high.
A rebellious whiff. That's a new one for us.
Yeah, me too.
I don't know where that came from. It just popped into my mind just then. But there we are. Steve, look, before we get into the Parry side of things, just so that folks kind of get to know you a little bit, I know you're a man who appreciates a good cortado, which I'd never heard of before we met a few years ago. And I was in this coffee shop with Steve, and there we are. He's got it, holding it up to the screen right now. I know you're a man that enjoys cortados, but tell us about Steve. Tell us about your story, how you joined the company, your background, and what your interests are.
Okay, yes, I do love a cortado, and to be honest, I couldn't start this podcast without one, so I have one to hand. My story, and I suppose the relevance to Parry, I hope is quite an interesting one. At school, as we all tend to do, you have a sort of an opportunity to have a day's work experience somewhere. I was given that day, which was at an ad agency in London, and I didn't know anything about ad world. None of my family were in it. I'd never met anybody in it. I went along to the agency.
Was that just random, Steve?
Yeah, we just kind of, it was drawn out of a hat. I mean, I was interested in art, and they kind of made it, oh, well, yeah, Steve, you'll probably. So went along, spent the day there, and my eyes had never been wider. I just thought, Jesus, this is a combination of these people are earning a living doing something that just seemed like such fun. And it didn't seem like work. And I thought, I need some of that. Fast forward, went to uni, English background, because at the time, in terms of the disciplines, I wanted to be a copywriter. And I became a copywriter. That's how I got into ad world. And I've been copywriting at agencies for about 5 years. And then I suppose the entrepreneur in me said, I think you can do this for yourself. I was at a crossroads in my life. I just had a baby daughter and thought, if I don't do it now, I'm never going to do it. So I did it. And I set up a business called Like Minded. And initially, it was effectively to work as a copywriter, but more strategic copywriting rather than just ads. Within about 6 months, I was constantly getting requests. Well, can you look at the whole package? Can you look at, art direction? Do you have anybody that does creative? And I thought, well, I don't, but I can get somebody. And slowly but surely, I kind of built up an agency. And I found that my skill set changed slightly from being copy specific to being conceptual. So I kind of ended up looking at what's the idea here. And, I'm for your lovely listeners, I'm of an age where in the ad world then, it was pre-Macs and so on. And it was about ideas on a pad and a felt pen. And to be honest, that freedom of actually just jotting down an idea stays with me now, because we all know that we can polish a turd and we can make anything look pretty good technically and creatively, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's a good idea. And I think that kind of grounding, I suppose, where I'd take ideas into the creative director and they would just literally rip them up, rip them up, rip them up, rip them up until they see one and go, like that, there's something in that. And it was just the kernel of an idea. You know, it was, how do the words work with the image? How does the image work with the words, and so on? And to this day, that's become kind of a fundamental basis for the way I like to operate. That was my grounding. And then taking that journey forward, I had an agency like-minded. And then that's where my journey with Cooper Parry began, coming up for 25 years ago.
Wow. So what happened? Did they hire you at Like-Minded then?
So good story, really. Cooper Parry put out a brief to agencies for what I don't think they described it as a rebrand, but it was they needed some marketing input. We weren't shortlisted. We weren't on there. They saw 4 or 5 agencies, 5 or 6 maybe, weren't entirely happy. And then they kind of threw the net a bit wider and, we got caught in that net. And I remember, getting the call, going in to a very, very traditional looking Victorian villa on Park Row in Nottingham, brass plaque outside the door, Cooper Parry, chartered accountants underneath it, lots of wooden paneling everywhere, partners in offices, lady with a tea trolley. I mean, it's as traditional as you can imagine. And I go in there and I take the brief and I go back to the agency and say, hey, guys, I've got a brief for a firm of accountants. What do you think? Collective groan. Oh, geez, no way. This is going to be a killer. And we looked at the brief and we said, I tell you what, let's just do what we think accountants should do. If they go with it, we've got a chance. We maybe do something different here. And if they don't, well, nothing ventured, nothing gained, etc. And I suppose with hindsight, looking back at it, that ballsiness allowed us to be super confident in our presentation because we thought, well, we've got nothing to lose. And our presentation was called We Don't Do Grey. And effectively, we wanted to turn what we saw as a very dull, traditional, grey, bluey, male, stale, pale industry into something that was sexier, more colourful, more exciting, and so on. So that was the basis of our initial presentation, and they loved it. So kind of first kick, but then, we've all been around the block enough to know that you get that initial buy-in and they go, well, we want you on board, but...
Can you just add a bit more grey?
Yeah. Exactly that, and when we said we wanted to change everything, well, just this and that, not a bit of it. It was a full embrace, go with it, let's run with it. And that actually has remained the picture ever since.
So they were ready for that, Steve. I have had the honour of speaking to A. Cheltenham a little bit,
yeah.
The CEO. And I remember him telling me a story once about how they were a new kind of youngish set of partners that had come in, and they must have been at a similar time that they engaged with you, that they were also rethinking a lot of things. Like he told me this story, of the partners that they used to go out for a beer or something, and immediately everyone take their ties off and just be like totally chilled out. And then they'd think, well, why on earth are we not being ourselves at work? Like we're literally dressing up to play a part in our suits and ties. That's not us. And so this sort of rebellion began against what was the traditions of bygone ages to kind of really embrace what was new. And he told me that he noticed that a lot of the entrepreneurs that Cooper Parry were beginning to work with as accountants, they noticed they weren't wearing ties, and then they weren't wearing jackets, and then they weren't wearing shirts. So, they were wearing T-shirts, I'll have to add. But, so was that all part of it, do you think? Was that the timing? Have I got that about right, that was happening behind the scenes?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think there were changes within the industry in terms of technology and stuff that was driving change anyway. Some kind of low-key transformational change. Some firms were embracing it more vigorously than others. But certainly Cooper Parry and that kind of set of 30-something-year-old partners, to your point, Matt, exactly that. They thought, well, we've got an opportunity to be ourselves in a space that it is not known for kind of this change. Let's see what's happened and what can happen, and let's have fun doing it. And that remains the same now. So Aid is still the CEO. He is the CEO. He's been CEO 10 years. And the team kind of, one of the key points that really is going to be a thread through this podcast in terms of what makes this happen and how can it come alive, is it being driven and endorsed from the very top. If it isn't, it will fail. It will singularly fail because, in terms of a structure, it's a fast-moving business. If there isn't the buy-in from the top, everybody begins to question it. Say, well, yeah, are you sure? And no, I think when I spoke to Aid, he wasn't 100% sure. And suddenly it's like a deck of cards. It just comes crashing down. I've been lucky enough to have 100% endorsement from Aid and the senior team right through the journey. It's kind of one of those things where, well, one, it's seriously odd having a head of creative at a firm of accountants. I don't know any others. And that in itself kind of speaks volume for how the business believes branding is central to the growth journey.
Hang on, we've jumped a bit, Steve. We've jumped a bit. So let's get there. I want to get there, but you were working for another agency. You were a founder of that agency. How did it happen? Eventually, you came on as this head of creative. Let's tell that piece, and then let's go back to Parry and strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. So we were like-minded. My agency, became their agency of choice, and we had a fantastic time. We created some, at the time, sort of pop art, I suppose, is the best description of it. It was very colourful. We introduced a different vocabulary to one that had been used. We immediately got rid of chartered accountants underneath the name. And so suddenly all around, and at the time, it was quite a kind of provincial exercise because the business was effectively Nottingham, Derby, Leicester. The growth we can come on to in a bit.
Oh, hold on. But, for those internationally, that is like in the heart of the UK. It's kind of what
Midlands.
The Midlands. If you ever heard of the legend of Robin Hood, it's basically his stomping ground. So there we are.
You got it. So Sherwood Forest and all that. But effectively, that was our geography. So it was relatively contained. And what we wanted to do, is grow our reputation within that and see what happened. So for about, I'm going to say 7 or 8 years, we went full on to that. We upset quite a few people. We irritated far more. We wanted to be the challengers. We were the challengers. And our name started to be recognized. Not massively, but there was an initial recognition. What that obviously meant was that people started to pick up, from a recruitment, attracting talent was easier and so on and so forth. So at that point, I'm still head of like-minded. In fact, Cooper Parry became my accountants. So I've kind of seen the whole experience as a customer. And then various financial crashes and so on, I got bored of running an agency because I wasn't actually doing what I enjoyed, which was the creative part. I was getting drawn into HR and, managing people and so on and so forth.
I've been there, Steve. It's a nightmare, isn't it?
It's like, it's
how did you become this sort of manager? It's like, I'm good at the creative stuff. I'm good at that. And now suddenly I've got to lead a team. And it's just, a lot of people feel that. So an opportunity came up, did it?
Yeah, well, so then I was a consultant again for Cooper Parry. And 7 years ago, they said, you know what, why don't you come inside? I'd never even thought of it, really. I didn't think I would be employable. I've been self-employed all my life. I'm not a corporate guy. But I knew Cooper Parry weren't a corporate organization. So I said, well, okay, let's give it a go. You may hate me, I may hate you, but I think I know you well enough. I tell you what, it's best decision I ever did. And again, I kind of go back to that endorsement from the top. You know, it wasn't, you can become head of creative, but this is the limited scope. It was, you know, and again, we'll move on to the brand in a minute, but it was an opportunity that one, I relished. And, you know, when I look back 7 years, I've had the time of my life. Loved it.
Awesome. So let's do that now. Let's sort of segue back a little bit in time and tell, I guess, the story from the company's perspective as best as you understand it, because the company I know has been going through some insane growth recently. But perhaps you could take us back to those early days, and then, you know, what was the thinking behind the adoption of this sort of very vibrant, aggressive, different approach to putting the brand out there? What, you know, from your perspective, tell us that story.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think, I suppose at a superficial level, it was around getting recognized, being noticed, you know, and so on. So that's kind of, wow, what's that? All our reference points at that point was we didn't want to mimic or look at what anybody else was doing in professional services. That was of no interest to us. It was, what are people doing in marketing branding universally that we can apply to this very dull sector? And that was exactly, you know, our approach. And again, that coincided with, as a business, and you've mentioned the kind of the change in the partner group. They didn't want to be associated with a very formal kind of industry. They were different. Their approach was different. They were young, they were hungry, and they had an opportunity. And I don't know how much of this is just serendipity, but, you know, there was enough of them of a like mind that kind of realized that they had something exciting, and where could it go?
It was risky, right, for them? Like, if you think about it, like, yeah, if it had gone wrong, they would have looked really silly, you know. So it's kudos to them for their bravery.
Very brave. They would have looked very silly. They would have lost a lot of money. They would have lost a lot of reputation. So, you know, I'm sure they all collectively could have gone back into, you know, the big four one way or another, but that wasn't their mindset. But you're right, it was a very brave thing to do.
Here's the interesting thing. Like, obviously, hindsight, as you say, serendipity is a lovely thing. But as a strategist now, and I work with companies all over the world, and I'm listening to this story, and people feel safe if they sit in and they look the same as all their peers in their sector. But in fact, as you rightly said, you know, pointed out, in a way, they had to stand out, right? It's probably the least safe thing to do sometimes, is to just sit in and look like everybody else. And I just think it's fascinating when you said you're not interested in what other firms were doing. You basically wanted to be completely different. So that is just the lesson I just wanted to highlight for the folks listening, right? If you're working in a brand and everything in the category is looking the same, then, you know, one of the things, assuming you've got buy-in from the top, as Steve has said, one of the things to do is basically do the opposite to what everybody else is doing. And what that will do is get you noticed. Now, the question is will it get you noticed in a good way or not? So, Steve, this started to get noticed. Was it noticed in a good way? How did you find the audience and the customers take it?
Yeah, it was definitely noticed, and it wasn't always in a good way. But kind of that wasn't really bothering us, because we realized that there was a fantastic thing which is called self-selection. So those people that found us kind of like the irritating kids on the back row of the bus being a noisy nuisance, those that really didn't like it would gravitate away. Those that thought, actually, we like this kind of slightly maverick, rebellious approach, because that's me as an entrepreneur. I'd like that. I get it. And again, actually going back to that point about the mindset of the partners, they were entrepreneurial. And I think that kind of that was a key driver to some of the businesses that, one, they were looking to attract, but also were attracted by this different positioning. Now, of course, that's one thing, putting up this brand image, but it has to be credible and it has to be sustainable, because if it's just built on smoke and mirrors, it's not going to last. People will see through it and so on. And we can talk about this in a minute, but that's almost where the alignment with culture becomes so central to the story, because it's not this, this podcast is just branding. This story is not just branding, it's branding and culture and strategy 100%. And mindset, etc.
100%. And I think that's a really good point to highlight. And we often find this, Steve, we are talking about branding, but branding is way more than just some fonts and some colors, as you rightly say. That's just the veneer. It's got to go deeper, and that's what I observed when I was, kind of connected to Cooper Parry and coming into your offices and so on. It was a completely different world that actually was something that all the staff, if you cut the staff open, it would say Cooper Parry, like running through them. There was a very different vibe involved. So yeah, talk to us about that, because the culture you mentioned, let's maybe touch on that a little bit. The culture of accountants, typically very studious, detail orientated, serious organization. But folks, when you go into a Cooper Parry office, I think you had one in Birmingham with a running track around it. It looked very Google-esque, vibrant, music playing, like coffee bars, crazy bulls set up in the corner, like people with post-it notes scribbling things on glass screens, just completely different to perhaps what you would normally expect. So where did all that come from? Because was that part of the strategy and part of the cultural side of things as well, Steve?
100%. I think the transition, if you like, I suppose there were a couple of major crossroads that happened. One of them was actually the disastrous kind of financial crash of 2008. And we still, as a business, we still define this as our kind of moment, because literally everything was jeopardy. We were going up the food chain, rising quite comfortably, confidently, and then suddenly, boom. And, obviously we weren't alone as a business. Every business was having it, but it was seriously challenging. What it did mean, though, is that some of the elements were evaluated differently, and it was a realization, okay, if we're going to maintain this business as we want it to be, we need to be more single-mindedly focused, and we want to be number one in any market that we choose to compete in. If we can't be number one in it, we don't want to enter it. And again, that kind of strategically, that ballsy mindset, if you like, meant that initially there was a paring down of, we're not going to start developing an HR business, we're not going to start developing a media business or anything. We need to be more focused on areas we can be number one. So that, if you like, foundation also meant, so to get to that, we need to attract the very best people. How can we attract the very best people? One of the ways is where people feel they can be themselves. So they don't have to kind of turn up and be schizophrenic. They can be their natural self. And again, the partners were displaying this. Because the partners were displaying this behavior, the rest of the team was displaying this behavior, and it becomes a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. And again, you probably remember, Matt, a few years ago, we introduced, we had a culture carnival. So we, as a firm of accountants, we embraced it to a point where we wanted to let other people have an insight into what we were doing, because one, we wanted to learn from others, but we also wanted to share what we were doing in the space. And again, to the point about, so that was driven by, again, Aid and April, who, head of people, and making a massive difference, because it was a realization that if you want to attract the best people, you have to create the best environment. And that's not just the best physical environment, which you've described, and it's great fun. It's also, what is it like to work there? What are the benefits beyond, what you get as your paycheck at the end of the month, kind of thing.
And why is it different, right? That's what I noticed. So my story started, you mentioned that I was invited to speak at, I think, was it the event called Revolution? I think it was.
Yeah, Revolution.
Revolution was one of the ones, and then, as you say, you had
Yeah.
sort of events every year. One was the Culture Carnival, where there was a circus, I think, and all sorts of crazy things. But what I noticed immediately, as you say, was the brief was not don't push it too far, Matt. The brief was push it as far as you can. We want to inspire people. We want to go crazy. So from a brand perspective, obviously that was really interesting for me to do, and I think I was just starting out in my consultancy journey as well. So it was amazing. I think I got like 2 or 3 clients off of that one speech, which was phenomenal for me. It was. I should probably pay Cooper Parry some commission, I guess. But then you didn't pay much for my speech, so there we are. That's fair play. But accountants, right? They're smart. But
it works both ways, Matt.
For sure. But that was the thing, though. What I thought was amazing, and because in the Midlands there wasn't a lot. There's probably not even many businesses anywhere. Right. So what Cooper Parry did was you looked at what I would call, I know it's a word sometimes that can get, misrepresented, but you looked at your tribe. Like, who are you there for? You're there for the maverick entrepreneurs, the people that believe in what you are doing, which is to be authentic, to be true to themselves, risk takers, like you. You were kind of mirroring your audience in a way. And then you created the space for all those people to come together and connect. And for me, I just saw all of that happening from the sidelines and just wanted to get involved because it was just revolutionary, literally.
Yeah.
To be part of.
Yeah, and it felt like that, to be honest. On the inside there was a groundswell, there was an energy. It was palpable, and when people came into the office, there was this, I'm not going to say it was a sense of wonder, but it was a kind of, wow, I wasn't expecting this. I thought you were a firm of accountants. I didn't realize you were a media agency kind of response. That was, if you like, the vibe. But that kind of brings me, I suppose, back to one of the key fundamentals of the way we looked at the brand. And it was, we split it into 3 parts, and you'll be familiar with some of these, Matt, in particular. We broke it down into how we look, so kind of our imagery, our the colors, the graphics, the fonts, and then how we sound. So the language that we used, and we were deliberately conversational, kind of authentic, jargon free wherever possible in an industry that is full of jargon. And a lot of the industry used jargon as a kind of, as a bluff to say, well, if you don't know what this means, you need to employ us. Well, we wanted to strip that away and kind of tell it as it is to a different audience. So it's how we look, how we sound. And the third part of the, Holy Trinity is how we roll. So that's our culture, that's our behavior. How we work, how we collaborate with each other, how we work with our clients, how we treat our clients, how we want our clients to treat our people, and so on and so forth. So that kind of Holy Trinity is central to the way we position the Cooper Parry brand.
No, absolutely. And that's why it's interesting that you mentioned April, because, head of people, super amazing lady, very got some amazingly progressive ideas. Whenever I speak to her, she's like 4-day weeks, or I think there was one policy that I remember talking to her about, and I hope I don't get in trouble revealing this, but there was one policy that Cooper Parry adopted. I don't know, you still got it. It was like, take as much holiday as you want, right? Which is like insane, right, for an accountancy firm to offer their staff. It might, from an outsider's perspective. And I remember April moaning at me. She was saying, like, the trouble is, Matt, we find that actually people take less holiday than they're entitled. They should be taking. So she was saying, I'm not sure if this policy of giving everybody all the holiday that they want is working, because they're not taking as much as I want them to have. Interesting.
Yeah, and it's a really good point, and that still kind of remains the case. So that we call it WFAF, work from anywhere, anytime, forever, is is part of our setup. We have actively pursued getting to a 4-day week. We started a couple of years ago. We're now at 4.5 days, but the ambition is still to go beyond. And it sort of brings back to, we have 5 generations in the business. We've got kids that are coming in who are not, they are looking to get a completely different balance to, kind of old farts like myself. It's just a very different mindset. And as a business, we need to accommodate all of those kind of generational variations and desires and aspirations. How do we accommodate that without kind of dumbing the whole thing down? And that is a challenge, but it also makes for an exciting, dynamic workplace.
So I got a quick question for you, Steve. You mentioned that you broke the brand down into how we look, how we sound, how we roll, and there seemed to be like a rebellious streak across all of those 3 areas. What is everybody else doing? We're going to try and do something different. But I guess my question is, in terms of the actually what you do. So, it sounds like the how was where you were differentiating. Did you differentiate in the what as well?
Yeah.
Or did you still do like, I know you did like amazing accountancy services. So, talk to us a little bit about that. Like, did you have to change the service offering at all or anything like that, just out of interest?
Well, yes and no. So again, it was what I think we're good at as a business is listening to our client base and sort of understanding what their pressure points are. So, in terms of conventional accountancy, so audit, tax and stuff, we still do all of that. But one of the things in terms of how the business is evolving, it's also accommodating other aspects of it. So for example, tax, it also accommodates sort of employer tax. So what can you do as a business that allows you to motivate your team as part of a business? So it's looking at different ways of working with businesses and finding, different solutions. And in terms of it's a little bit cliche, but we are looking to, I suppose, to create, if you like, going forward, the next gen professional services group, if you like. And when we started on this journey, we didn't know what the destination was. We had no idea. And in fact, it's not where we thought it was then. We still have no idea. But what we do know is that we have a direction of travel, and we're gonna go and we're gonna rocket fuel it as much as we can, and we're gonna have fun along the way. But in terms of, to your point about what services are we looking to change, it's almost we need to be able to respond to elements such as, for example, tech. So some of the tech offer that we now deliver is very different. Well, it wasn't even on the agenda 20 years ago, for example. And that is part of the business landscape and an essential one.
Oh, phenomenal. So like from a strategy perspective, what we always say is like, listen to the customer. Okay. And you're there for your tribe, if you like. So their wants, needs, pains. If you can serve them well, and you've got that, and it makes sense within your sort of from your brand's positioning to do so, then create them the offer that perhaps they don't even know they need themselves, right? So I guess that's part of what you're talking about there, strategically client focused or customer focused.
Yeah, I mean, client focus is central. Our CX is very, very important to us. Some of you may know and understand NPS, and I don't want to get into, why it's important. Fundamentally, as a kind of measure, it's important because it's telling us what our customers, clients are thinking of us. It tells us and informs us what we need to change. And kind of as a metric, again, we don't look at that in terms of how are we scoring against KPMG or PwC. We want to say, well, how are we comparing against John Lewis? How are we comparing against Amazon, Google? Those are our reference points, not just people within professional services. And I suppose that kind of premise applies to a lot of what we do. We touched on the office space, for example. We moved pretty much 10 years ago. We relocated 3 smaller offices again, for the global audience, those ones in, Nottingham, Derby, Leicester, whatever, into one what we called a hub, super hub. And we now have one of those in Castle Donington in the Midlands. We have another one in London. We've got one in Manchester, and we've got one in Thames Valley, just in Reading. So, but those are kind of super hubs rather than small satellite offices. And that's deliberate, because within those environments, we can create a space that is not like any other, but it's collaborative. It's a place where you want to go, where you want to have a cortado, where you want to meet up with people. And let's be honest, part of the challenge is also it's an environment that we want people to want to come into the office space. Not every day, but, it's one of those that, collaboration is still a big thing. And certainly for, the marketing team, we want to make sure that we can be in each other's presence, once, twice a week. And that doesn't seem like a big ask. But to do that, you have to have an environment that people want to engage with. And certainly that kind of has been a key thread and mantra through what we're doing in our kind of, real estate portfolio, if you like.
Fascinating. And as you say, that has two effects. The internal one that you've mentioned there with your team and the talent that it attracts, and it's the type of mindset that somebody who, is an accountant but sees themselves as being able to be a little bit different, be themselves, be their, all of that. And if they're top talent, I can see why that you are offering them something completely different to anyone else on the market from a job perspective, from an employer brand perspective. But on the flip side, as an entrepreneur, you want to go into your accountants and brainstorm ideas around, how best to manage the finances of the business or your own personal finances. So it lends itself to that kind of environment as well. So on both sides, it makes an awful lot of sense. So really, really smart move. I was going to ask you, and I'd really love to hear if Jacob has any questions. But before I turn to Jacob, on the growth, you've mentioned you've opened up new hubs around the UK. Just give us a bit of a sense of if you're open to it, the commercial sort of growth, because just so our international audience particularly can kind of get a sense of how this brand, although as you rightly say, it's not just the brand, it's the other bits and bobs involved as well, but how that strategy has played out commercially would be really interesting for folks to know. I
think accountants love a number, and here, the numbers tell a very good story. So, for example, just going back to the scenario I painted, when I first got involved with Cooper Parry kind of 20 years ago, the business was probably turning over, I don't know, 7 or 8 million, something like that. Fast forward to today, it's circa 180 million. Back then there were probably 75 people that, we're touching 1,500 people now. We have 600 people working in London. The scale is, the trajectory, I should say, is kind of in one direction.
And I've noticed the company doing a few M&As along the way, and obviously getting like-minded teams together.
Yeah,
really,
absolutely. So that growth, one, it needs to be sustainable. So the M&A activity, acquisitions, has been a key part for kind of a lot of the big jumps. But the organic growth is still market leading. And that is, in a sense, it's that combination, not one, not the other. It's the two working side by side. We've had 11 deals in the last 2 years. So there's been a lot of change. That puts a lot of focus on the culture too. Integrating businesses into the Cooper Parry culture isn't an easy thing, because there are not many cultures like Cooper Parry. So that presents challenges, but it also presents unbelievable opportunities, really very exciting opportunities. And also the kind of generates an appeal for strategic hires. So people who have a real skill set, and they suddenly say, well, these Cooper Parry people, they keep resonating with me. I need to have a conversation, and that attracts the right caliber of talent across the business.
I reckon there's a whole podcast right here on how to handle M&As. Like I've got a client I'm working with in Norway at the moment. Literally exact challenges that you've had. You know, we're onboarding a load of new companies together, 4 in the last year, and yeah, you know, for getting that together is a tricky one. So I'll park that. That might be something for us, or maybe April might fancy jumping on in it in a bit. That would be
Absolutely.
interesting. But you've been very, very modest about the growth. Like, as far as I understand, at least one report I was reading, you're the fastest growing firm in the year in this sector for the last 3 years. Like, so sustainable, speedy growth. I think it's saying growing organically at around 10% each year. So
Yeah.
you're doing something right, Steve. And my view as a brand guy is it's definitely centered around the brand and the culture and the leadership, like you've said. But we'll let the folks decide. But without that, the truth is without that, you won't be attracting as much attention. And that is kudos to you and the leadership team at Cooper Parry for really sticking with that and continuing to be brave in a space which is very conservative.
Yeah, and well, thank you for that. Genuinely, it's and it sounds corny, but it really feels like a team effort. The team at Cooper Parry is exceptional. Just going back to when I first was introduced to Cooper Parry, Mel, who now is head of marketing at Cooper Parry, she's been a constant the whole time, and so that kind of continuity is also key to this. While there's a lot of change going on, it's a fast-moving, fast-growing business, but you do need some constants, running through that. Aid, April, Mel, and so on provide that kind of backbone to driving it and realizing the vision that we need.
Brilliant. Well, look, Jacob, you've been remarkably and strangely and eerily quiet throughout this conversation.
Yeah, should I be worried by this?
Well, I was going to make a comment, Matt, because you're very prepared for this episode. The amount of questions you had lined up, usually it's like you have 5 tiny bullet points, but you had like 5 pages of notes.
I've been looking forward to this for ages. Like literally, as everybody knows that was involved in the brand summit, like I used Cooper Parry as a case study, Steve. And so, I've done my research. Oh, but Jacob, throw a curveball. Ask Steve something super interesting that I've not thought of.
Well, first off, I wanted to say bravo on your outline, Matt. It helped speed things along and go very smoothly, and just so much value from Steve as well. So I didn't really have any extra value to add, so I'll let this go. But I do have a couple of questions around the future, because you've achieved so much already, like transformational, totally amazing, huge growth. But how do you keep that momentum going? Like, how do you stay bold? How do you keep pushing boundaries when all of this is going on?
I think that it almost feels like you're on a rocket, you're fueling it, and it's going in one direction, and you kind of just react as you travel through different orbits. So one of the things that we've done is we created a vision that we've shared publicly. It's on the website, and that was our vision to 2025. And it covers everything from financials to people aspects to tech and so on. And we put that in the public domain because we wanted to kind of say, well, this is our vision. We'll deliver most of it, we hope. We'll fail epically on some aspects, and that's okay. We'll learn from that and move on. And we're in the middle of kind of structuring our 2030 vision. So to your point, how are we going to kind of keep this momentum going? There's a bold number we're going to put out there that, we aspire to our turnover being £1 billion by 2030. That's a quantum leap, but that's our vision. And to do that, there'll be a combination of, more M&A activity, organic growth, and also exploring different geographies, wider and global opportunities as well. So there's an awful lot, but to the point that Matt was keen to pick up on in terms of the integration, to make it sustainable, you can't just rush it. It's got to be considered, planned, So when we talk to firms, there has to be a kind of a connection. There has to be a like-mindedness, if you like, for that to go to the next stage. If there isn't, it's just a bolting on of numbers, and that will fail. So C-suite guys that are driving this business are super focused on this. And, it's because they know that this is the only way it's going to happen. If we're going to realize that incredible vision, it needs to be done in a structured, considered, but also creative way. So, we don't want to lose the rebellious spirit. We don't want to, lose the sense that we are becoming just like the others. We want to keep that edge. How do you do that? That is a challenge that we know we're going to have to face head on as we grow, but we can't wait. We love it. Bring it on.
Love it. I've read that strategy, the previous strategy document that's out, and I was super pleased from a strategic perspective, right, to see a section called brand in there, which is very unusual for a sort of a commercial document, if you like, usually, and just love that that's up front and center in the visioning of the business. And for me, as you say, like for me, I always sort of preach brand. You've got to know your positioning. You've got to know why you're different. You've got to know why you're unusual and offering something, different to what people can get elsewhere. And that is absolutely crucial, to what you've done. And I hope, it sounds like it's going to stick around. So, keep it up. Really good. Listen, I had a quick question around, you mentioned the future, but what about your tips? There's a lot of people listening now who are brand builders or entrepreneurs or in marketing, and they might be in and amongst the grey, if you like, Steve, where you were 20 odd years ago. Got any kind of Steve's top tips for brand builders who find themselves in that scenario and that perhaps want to break out of it? So, give us your thoughts.
I think some of it isn't rocket science, but it is belief. So you've got to be brave. If you want to do something bold, you've got to be brave. And you've also got to take everybody with you on the journey. One of the things that we did when we kind of were developing the brand is if you like, some ideas, we crowdsourced it within the business. Which to some people said, well, why ask all these people? Because you'll just get, however many people you ask, you'll get that number of different opinions. It was the best thing we did because everybody had a sense of ownership that they'd kind of at least been consulted with, and in some instances had quite an impact on what we were doing as a brand. So kind of be brave, engage with your team. Don't try to do it all on your own. Look outside of your sector. So if you are in automotive, look, to FMCG companies. If you're an FMCG company, look at professional services. Don't use all your peers as your, automatic reference points. Think about your people. Your people become ultimately your brand ambassadors. If they kind of walk and talk your brand, you've done it. What I love actually when I go into the office, and we never have ever had this sense of, oh, client X is coming in, can you just keep it down? Or client Y is over there, we just need to make sure the whole experience is great. It just, nothing changes. Nobody has to do. Our dress code is really simple. It's just wear something. That's it. And that kind of empowerment to the team is incredibly liberating. It means that they're treated as adults. They can behave as they think is appropriate. Therefore, they buy into the brand and everything it stands for, the how we roll part. And it doesn't have to be just 2 or 3 people saying this is what we're all about. Everybody is talking it, even if they're not aware of it. Ideally, and I suppose this is where my journey with Cooper Parry, I've been very lucky. I've had the buy-in from the top. Sometimes that may not be possible, But whatever you can do to get that buy-in and consistent buy-in from the top will make your life so much easier when you're going on this journey. No question. Have fun. You know, life is short. You know, there's a lot of flying around in every direction in all our lives. Work is a big chunk of what we do. Have fun. You know, and if you have fun, it normally, not always, but it normally breeds success. Success breeds fun, and so on and so forth. You know, enjoy the people you're with. That's probably it. I'm spent.
Quite a few.
That is a brilliant set. I love that. Have fun. Fun is so underrated. That's what I'm often saying that to Jacob because he's so miserable. I'm like, Jacob, come on now, have some fun.
Well, I have been putting up with you for 6 years nearly.
Brilliant. Jacob, anything more from you? Because I think that's been a fantastic walk through the story and you know, so much value along the way. But anything else from you before we sort of sign off from Steve?
Well, we should learn where we can connect with Steve and learn more.
Yeah.
So Steve, where can we connect with you?
Well, I mean, if you want to reach out to me at Cooper Parry, literally my email is, you know, Stephen with an N. So it's Steve N at cooperparry.com. Feel free to engage. I love a debate. I like a conversation. You'll find me on LinkedIn. I suppose if you're ever, and I appreciate you have a fully global audience here, but if you're ever passing any of our offices, please come in. We have a great cortado. I'd love to share it with you. And
careful what you wish for, Steve. You'll get thousands of crazy brand builders like showing up, you know, asking all sorts of questions about the brand.
I'd be happy to engage with them. I'd love it.
Well, can you educate our listeners on what a cortado is?
Yes, it comes in a small cup like so. It's an Italian version. It's a Spanish version of a kind of macchiato. So it's double shot of espresso and hot milk. And it's the perfect way to start a morning and a podcast.
Absolutely.
There we are, folks. You heard it here first. Even tips on your coffee. Listen, Steve, thank you so much, you know, from the bottom of my heart for coming in, spending some time. I know you're incredibly busy and, you know, you've got a lot going on. So it's been an absolute honor having you on the podcast. We wish you all the best. Keep in touch. And yeah, thank you very much.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Jacob.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed the whole Just Branding experience. Thank you.